blinking. And also, remember, we reported yesterday that Republican senators gave Vice President Pence an earful about the shutdown. They know that Democrats have the upper hand on this shutdown. The last shutdown, Democrats lost, but Republicans are losing this one. And it looks like the White House is going to back down. But of course, we still have to get a deal eventually, or we could be facing another shutdown.
Bob, you know, this is a president who does not back down. Is there concern that his base might view this as caving on his campaign promise?
I think so, but at the same time, he's not caving completely. He obviously wants to get some type of deal in the next 2 to 3 weeks, or he could declare a national emergency. Certainly, he wasn't ruling that out yesterday. That had been seemed like an option A, and then it was off the table, and then it was back on the table. So he still could do that in 2 to 3 weeks. He could do it whenever. But without a doubt, this is Nancy Pelosi. She knows Washington. She's been around a long time. She's been Speaker before. And in the whole State of the Union showdown, she won that. She has had the upper hand, and Trump knows it, and he backed down on the State of the Union. It looks like he's going to back down on this funding battle, because this is what Democrats said. You must open up the government for us to negotiate.
You know, this is only expected to be a short-term measure. So are we going to be back in the same situation in just a few weeks, Bob?
Absolutely. I think that there's going to be no way to get an easy deal. And you think about, when you talk about immigration and dreamers and the wall, remember, immigration is very difficult to do. The Senate 5 or 6 years ago passed a bipartisan bill. It died in the House. That took months and months and months. So to get some type of immigration deal in the next even 2 to 3 weeks, it's going to be extremely hard. Now, they could punt again. They could have 2 to 3 weeks, and they could punt it. Congress is very good at punting. But this is going to be we're going to be back at this point probably within a month.
And who do you say are the big winners and losers in this at this point?
Oh, without a doubt, Speaker Pelosi. Speaker Pelosi is showing why she was picked by her colleagues. She has the experience. And as I said, she just knows the ins and outs in Washington, and she had a strong hand. And this is why. And I think also Senator Schumer, Pelosi and Schumer, there's been no break between the two of them. The Democratic Party has been united. Speaker Pelosi has a saying where she says, diversity is our strength and unity is our power. And certainly they stared down the White House on a number of issues. And that's why it looks like they're going to get a win here, even though it's temporary. And as you know, Rena, politics can change very quickly.
Oh, as we have learned minute by minute here. Bob, if you could hang with us for just a second, I want to bring in, joining me now on set is Rebecca Roiphe, who is joining me as well. So Rebecca, you know, this was a Roger Stone who just came out a few moments ago and was very confident. This did not seem like a man whose house was just raided a few hours ago. He is standing firm. What stood out to you with this indictment?
Well, I mean, I think the facts are really stunning. The most significant fact in there is that a senior campaign official was directed to coordinate with Stone to get those WikiLeaks emails dumped. And so, you know, there aren't that many people who that could be. It has to be somebody who can direct a senior campaign official. So, I mean, possibly Manafort, but it seems to me most likely that person is the president of the United States.
If you are the president's personal lawyer at this point, how do you protect him? What is your biggest concern based on what you know?
I think your biggest concern is what is coming down the pike, because, you know, these are all process crimes. And as, you know, Sarah Huckabee Sanders said, you know, they're crimes that have nothing to do with the president. And the crimes themselves have nothing to do with the president because they are lying. But the underlying facts, the things that he was lying about, have everything to do with the president and the campaign. He can't distance himself from his senior campaign advisors, and he can't distance himself from Stone. So I would be very worried about what it is that Mueller knows that's behind the facts. Based on just the information, because it has been quite a windy road, and we get things from different directions, but based on what we know at this point, is there anything that can directly incriminate the president or give us reason to believe that the president could be in trouble here? There is no direct evidence yet. There is no direct evidence. But in this indictment, there is no way that Robert Mueller would have brought this indictment without a lot of evidence to back it up. And so I think there's more to come. He has more. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought this indictment. What that is, we just don't know yet. What would you say are the sort of severity of the charges at this point that they could be facing? That who could be the president?
The president could be facing.
Well, I mean, that's the million-dollar question. So that he keeps saying no collusion, yes. And there was that whole weird backpedaling that Rudy Giuliani made that said maybe somebody was colluding, but it wasn't the president. No, nobody was colluding. So everybody keeps throwing out that term collusion. That's the conspiracy to defraud the United States, or conspiracy to engage in other kinds of crimes that involve the hacking and so forth. So the question is, how far does that conspiracy extend? I mean, it seems we already have the indictment of the Russians, so we already know that somebody was trying to defraud the United States. The question is, who was working with those people? And now it seems, not from the charges that were brought against Stone, but from the underlying facts that Roger Stone and person number 2 and person number 1, who are Jerome Corsi and Randy Serkico, Credico are actually involved in this in this conduct in some way. How extensively, we don't know yet.
But when we talk about cooperation, Jerome Corsi, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Rebecca, Jerome Corsi publicly turned down a plea agreement, so he's not cooperating, is our understanding. It does not appear Roger Stone is in any position wanting to cooperate. So if you know this, and you're Mueller and his team, and you know these folks are not going to cooperate, you might not get anything more, why go through this, indict them, and bring them out like this? What do you have to gain knowing that they're not going to cooperate with you?
Well, you have people who committed crimes. I mean, prosecutors are, in some ways it's strategic. They're building their case and they're doing their best to build their case. But also, if while they're building their case, they find evidence that somebody committed a crime, they charge those people. And that's what they should do. And especially, I know that these are crimes that are not, they don't have to do with collusion, but they are significant, serious crimes, and they undermine the way the criminal justice system works. If you're threatening witnesses, as Stone has accused of doing in this indictment, and if you're lying to Congress and lying to the FBI, those are serious crimes, and there's no way a prosecutor would ignore that once they got evidence that was happening.
It's interesting. In this, you talk about person 1 or person 2, but in that little wiggle room where potentially it could be the president, we don't know and have any, why not name that person, say person 1 or person 2? Is there any reason to the lingo in that?
I think the language is significant. So he uses the passive tense in every other part of the indictment. He uses, as you say, person number 2, organization number 1, and lawyers are trained not to use the passive tense. So if he's doing it for a reason. And I think it's a reason related to why he refuted the BuzzFeed story, which is he is not ready to reveal whatever is behind that statement yet. And he doesn't want to even give a clue. And therefore, it's going to remain behind a black curtain until, I think probably until that final report comes out. But certainly he's just not ready yet. He hasn't developed the evidence as far as he wants to develop it, so it's not coming out yet.
It seems so much that Roger Stone is taking a very different approach than Paul Manafort. He's really fighting this and being very public. When he meets that federal judge in D.C. next week, do you think they could slap a gag order and tell him don't talk?
Oh, absolutely, they could. I mean, there have been battles between defendants and courts over gag orders, and I could imagine that playing itself out with Roger Stone because he's such a personality and he's so insistent on pursuing things the way he wants to pursue things that I could see that turning into a battle. But, maybe under these circumstances, Roger Stone might behave differently because the consequences are so high.
I want to actually play for you Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, business associates. I want to play for you what he had to say about Roger Stone in connection to the president. It's actually in a documentary called Get Me Roger Stone.
Roger's, relationship with Trump has been so interconnected that it's hard to define what's Roger and what's Donald. While it will be clearly a Trump presidency, I think it's influenced by a Stone philosophy.
Hard to tell what's the difference between Roger Stone and President Trump. If you're President Trump, I know I asked you this earlier, but what is your biggest fear having Roger Stone coming out like this? Well, I can't imagine it really helps your case.
Yeah, no, I mean, and he can't do what he's been doing all along, sort of with Flynn and a little bit even with Manafort trying to say, well, they weren't really that important. They only worked on the campaign for a little while.
Yeah.
The trees are falling around him. I mean, these are his close cohort who are being indicted for crimes that, while maybe don't have to do exactly with collusion, are circling around that investigation. And so why is Roger Stone lying about these fundamental facts that have to do with, working with Russia to undermine the American election? And, if I was the president, I would be concerned because I can't distance myself from Stone. So the only thing I can do, I suppose, is try to say there's no collusion, no facts of collusion. And that's what Roger Stone came out saying on the steps of the courthouse. I assume that the president will echo that, but it's increasingly not very effective given what the substance of those lies are about.
Rebecca Royfee, so grateful you're here on set, and I hope you'll stick with us this afternoon. We've got a lot of news breaking this afternoon. Appreciate it, Rebecca.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Well, for more on the indictment, I also want to bring back in Editor-in-Chief Bob Cusack. Bob, thanks for hanging with us. The president actually tweeted out this morning, just as Rebecca said, no collusion. I want to play some reaction from what Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders had to say about this. We don't actually have the soundbite, but essentially she's saying this has nothing to do with the president.
Right. And I think they're going to continue to say that until we hear from Mueller otherwise. But certainly we're getting more clues to this Mueller mystery of what he knows. And certainly the indictment, which is really a good read, on page 4, it does say that the Trump campaign officials were in contact with Stone. And the issue here, Rena, as you know from a number of investigations, especially this one, is that when you're sitting down with federal officials, if you lie, you can go to jail for that lie. And certainly a lot of people have been caught in alleged lies. Now, obviously, Stone deserves his day in court, but some of his argument that he didn't know about WikiLeaks and he had no contact, if you look at the indictment, it's a very strong case that he was aware that these WikiLeaks dumps were going to drop, and then they did. So that's why Mueller's going after him, and certainly Mueller has flipped a lot of people, but I don't think one of them is going to be Roger Stone. I don't think he'll ever flip on Trump.
Yeah, and a lot of people say he's banking on potentially a pardon at this point, and that's why he's so confident that the president's going to do that to him, do that for him. I want to ask you, though, about Democrats. They've been slamming the indictment and pointing out Stone's close relationship with the president. Is there anything that Congress can do at this point, and do you expect them to take any action?
No, I don't think so. And I think it would be wise for House Democrats and their new majority to focus on the agenda. And certainly Speaker Pelosi, as well as the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, have really been tamping down any type of impeachment talk because, number one, they can wait until the end of the investigation, which we don't even know when it's going to end. But at the same time, Nancy Pelosi is saying it's a high bar for impeachment because, remember, Bill Clinton was impeached, but then he was acquitted by the Senate, and politically that whole process actually helped him. So Nancy Pelosi was around during those days. So the biggest question she's going to have to answer is, are we going to move forward on impeachment? And maybe that's why Trump has been treating her pretty nicely. Doesn't have a nasty nickname about her because she's going to be under a lot of pressure to move forward on impeachment at some point.
We were watching yesterday the votes in the Senate to try and reopen the government, a Democratic one, also a Republican one backed by the president. Something that surprised us, and I'm curious if it surprised you, there were 6 Republican senators who came out against the president's plan. Were you surprised by that? And could that indicate in any way, I don't know that you can make it, if this is one bridge too far, but could Republicans be changing their tune towards the president in any way?
Well, he's still very strong with the base. So certainly if you have a Republican primary threat, and remember, Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell are up in 2020, and they're more vulnerable in a primary than a general election. So they want the president's endorsement. So I don't think they're going to abandon Trump. But at the same time, those votes, well, the one vote did surprise me. I did not think the defections on the Republican side would be as high as 6. I thought maybe 4, tops 5. Fascinating vote. Mitt Romney was one of those defections, breaking with the White House in one of his early votes. And on the Democratic side, it was only Joe Manchin, who represents a state that Trump won by 42 points in 2016. Didn't get Doug Jones of Alabama. Didn't get any other Democrats. So that was a big signal that you had this showdown of show votes. But who won the showdown? It was Democrats. And that's why I think you're seeing Trump back down today, or at least apparently backing down.
Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort was also in court today. A prosecutor said that the special counsel's office does not believe Manafort should get any credit for cooperating with them. What does that say to you?
Well, that he has just changed his story a number of times. He was cooperating, and then he wasn't, and then Mueller went after him for after reaching a deal, then allegedly not telling the truth after that. So he's not a reliable witness, and that's why Mueller has gone after the people who have not cooperated very hard, put Manafort in solitary confinement. This is not the life that Paul Manafort, who got used to a very ritzy life, is used to, and certainly Mueller's tried to break him, and he did to some degree, but then he's changed his tune, and maybe, and of course the speculation arena is Paul Manafort is also hoping for a pardon, and who knows if that'll happen, but because of the time he was looking in prison, he might have thought, well, instead of spending any time, maybe I'll not turn on the president and hopefully get a pardon. So who knows where this goes from here. But the fact that this indictment has come down, now there are 6 people in Trump's orbit who have been indicted. That's a lot.
Certainly is. Bob Cusack, so grateful you could break this all down with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Rena.
You bet. Well, the government shutdown is leading to delays at some of the country's major airports. The FAA said they experienced a slight increase in air traffic controllers calling out sick at 2 facilities. The controllers are part of thousands of federal workers who have been working without pay. And as a result of the sick calls, there were delays at airports in New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, even Tampa, Florida. CBS News transportation correspondent Chris Van Cleve joins us by phone. He's been monitoring all these airports. Chris, what's the impact we're seeing at this point, and how exactly is the FAA handling it?
Well, the biggest impact you're seeing is at LaGuardia, where you've had about 500 flights delayed today. Think about this a bit like you had a weather disruption and the kind of delays you see around something like that. So there was a staffing issue this morning where the FAA says there was a slight increase in the number of air traffic controllers who called in sick. The union says they do not condone an organized effort or a sick out, if you will. But, today is also the day that they should have gotten paid and didn't miss their second paycheck. Whether or not that played into the timing here, who knows? But there was an increase in staffing, increase in sick calls, I should say, at 2 FAA air traffic control centers, one in Leesburg outside of D.C. and the other in Jacksonville, Florida. And that resulted in the FAA having to sort of slow down the traffic coming out of some major airports, primarily LaGuardia, which basically means fewer planes were able to take off and land until they were able to get staffing back up. And, think of it as like a freeway where you suddenly close 2 lanes. Fewer cars are getting through. There's a backup that has to clear even after the lanes open. And that's sort of what you're seeing now. Planes were taking off and landing this whole time, just at a slower rate than usual. And this is a real clear impact of the shutdown. We saw another impact of the shutdown today in Monroe, Louisiana, where an American Airlines flight to Dallas was canceled because the TSA checkpoint didn't have enough people to open it, so there was no one to screen the passengers. Relatively small flight, 26 passengers affected, but that's the first flight I've heard of being impacted by the shutdown.
And this is right now, we're looking at the FlightAware, I believe. This is the FlightAware map around LaGuardia at this very moment. Chris, these are, correct me if I'm wrong, these are folks calling in sick, right?
Yeah, what we are hearing is that there was a slight increase in the number of sick calls by air traffic controllers at a couple of facilities that handle traffic once it takes off from an airport and is flying above where the tower would handle it. So, think of the plane that's sort of en route to somewhere.
Right.
2 of the centers that handle that traffic saw an increase in sick calls. That just reduced the number of staff available. Because while air traffic controllers are on the job and working without pay, and the vast majority of them have showed up every day as scheduled, there has been an increase in sick calls. There's also no support staff working. The support staff for the air traffic controllers have all been furloughed. So the ATC folks are doing more other work than they normally would. So you have, it's simply a tasking issue, right? Like if you normally have 10 people and suddenly you have 8, well, you're not going to get as many things done. You can't handle as much. And the staffing reached a point where the FAA felt they couldn't safely handle the workload, so it was thinned. Mm-hmm. And whether that was to make a point or it was purely people just couldn't afford to come to work today, I don't know if we'll ever know that, but it's gotten the attention of Washington.
Oh, it certainly has.
Lawmakers are talking about it. Rahm Emanuel was talking about it today, the mayor of Chicago, at an American Airlines event here at Chicago O'Hare, where I am. It certainly got people's attention today when all of a sudden the New York area airspace is seeing delays, not because of weather, not because it's New York, which, you get a lot of delays just because it's New York, but because of air traffic control staffing.
So, Chris, what's the sense going in for folks traveling this weekend? What's your advice to them at this point? It doesn't look like this government shutdown is ending, but the president's got something to say. We're going to wait to see what he has to say. But if it's not lifted by this weekend, what's your advice to folks who are traveling?
Sure. Some of this is going to be random. I had a flight out of Reagan National Airport today to Chicago O'Hare. Flight left on time and landed early. Mm-hmm. There's a certain amount of randomness to all of this. We know that there are staffing issues. If you would happen to have that flight out of Monroe today, you're still sitting in Monroe today. If you were flying out of LaGuardia to, say, Miami to warm up for the weekend, you probably had a delayed flight today. So there's some of this you're not going to be able to control or predict.
Right.
What you can control or predict is getting to the airport with enough time so if the lines are longer than usual, you still make your flight. I think you got to be patient, and just remember the people that are at those TSA checkpoints that are checking your bags and your ID are working without pay. They've missed 2 paychecks. These are folks that make about $30,000 a year. So the hardship for them is very real. Mm-hmm. And then the air traffic controllers who are on the job, who have missed 2 paychecks, are working without pay as well. And just take into account there are some people that just won't be able to afford to come to work, and that is a ripple effect that may make your travel process take longer than it normally would. So to use a cliche that normally, makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up with rage is pack your patience.
Pack your patience, and indeed, and you've broken down exactly why it's so important, Chris. As you watch these flights, Chris, at this point, we've heard, aviation unions warn about safety issues because of the shutdown. When it comes to those air traffic controllers that you're mentioning, what is really the big overarching concern going into the weekend?
I'm really glad you asked the safety question. If I can unpack it for just a second, there is immediate danger, and then there's sort of this concern about long-term safety impacts that I think are different in scope and scale. Air traffic controllers that are on the job right now, the ones who showed up to work today, are on the job. They're doing the job. They are taking the job seriously. Same with the TSA folks, same with the FAA inspectors and the air marshals. So in that sense, I don't think there is a safety impact. I am not worried about getting on a plane. I've been on probably 15 flights during the shutdown. I'll be on one tonight. I'll be on one on Sunday. I don't think there's a real safety issue today. The concern and the point the unions are making is you don't really want your air traffic controllers to be distracted by the fact that they may not be able to make their rent on the 1st or their mortgage payment on the 1st. And you don't really want to stop the training system. All training, all hiring, all recruiting for the TSA, for air traffic controllers, all of that's been stopped. So, there will be a ripple effect here, and at some point it's going to really impact staffing and the ability for these agencies to do their job. I don't know that that's today. So when the unions talk about a safety concern, I think in the proper context, that's a big picture, macro, long-term thing. It is not saying there's an urgent safety concern today. I don't think there is an urgent safety concern today.
Fascinating to hear you talk about a potential ripple effect. Chris Van Cleve, grateful you're monitoring this for us. CBS News transportation correspondent. Chris, thank you.
Sure thing.
Well, coming up, we are awaiting remarks from the president where a deal to end the shutdown could be announced. We're going to
trying to talk the president into a 3-week spending deal to give the government time to reopen and also give leaders here on Capitol Hill a chance to continue these negotiations over border wall funding. But they're not sure that the president's going to go for it. So it could end up being a 2-week spending deal instead. Beyond that, Senator Shelby said that this idea of some kind of down payment for the wall or some other kind of border security measure is still being discussed at the White House, and he doesn't know what the president is going to decide about that. And that is key, Rena, because if the president comes out and says, okay, I have decided to embrace either a 2-week or 3-week spending bill to get the government reopened, get these workers paid, and we'll keep talking about the wall, that sounds like something that most of Congress could go for right away. They could probably get the government open by tomorrow. But if he comes out and says, I'm fine with opening the government for 2 or 3 weeks, but I still want a little bit of wall money or something else that would be unpalatable to Democrats, then we could be in a prolonged standoff as well. So, everybody here on Capitol Hill, including top Republican leaders, is waiting and watching to see what the president eventually settles on.
And we are waiting and watching. It looks like Bill Shine, communications director, is there at the top step, is what it looks like to me. Nancy, what are you hearing from Democrats if the president does, in fact, put forward some sort of proposal like this? Your sense is that the Democrats would be on board?
Sure. Democrats said yesterday that if he would just reopen the government right away for 3 weeks, that they would be happy to continue to talk with him about border security funding. It's not as if they're going to embrace a wall tomorrow, but they'd be willing to continue negotiations. So that is something that Democratic leaders could get on board with. The only question is how quickly they could vote in the House. The Senate is here; it's in session. The House is not. So that is one sticking point. But if he comes out with something more complicated, if there are strings attached to this 2 or 3 week spending bill, that's when we're going to have to talk to Democratic leaders after his announcement and say, what do you think? How could you stomach this? In fact, there's so much confusion here on Capitol Hill, mixed with optimism, I will say. People are encouraged. They do believe that these air traffic control problems could be a tipping point and could force action. But there's so much confusion about what the president is going to say that when we spoke to Democratic leaders in the House, they said, we can't say right now how quickly we could vote because we just don't know what it is. If it's something non-controversial, we could do a voice vote this afternoon. What that basically means is that they don't even have to bring the House back to do it because it would be, more or less anonymous. But if it is something that is a little more controversial, then they would actually have to give House members 24 hours notice to get back here to Washington to vote, and then this could drag on through the weekend.
Incredible. Nancy, the fact you've got the Senate there, it was really hearing you say that Senator Shelby still doesn't know exactly what the president will put forward. Are you surprised that sort of key Republicans on Capitol Hill are seems to be not fully aware of what the president might do at this point?
I'm not surprised at this point because that has kind of been a running theme over the past 6 weeks. They frankly didn't know that he was going to balk in the first place after they passed a spending bill back in December that didn't include his $5.7 billion in border wall money. Had they known that he was going to threaten to veto it, they wouldn't have put it up for a vote in the Senate in the first place. And it's a part of the reason why Senate Leader Mitch McConnell has taken a back seat all these weeks is because, he knows he can't speak for the president. Time and time again, White House officials and Senate leaders have thought they were on the same page, but then the president turns the page and says no, he's putting his foot down. And so McConnell felt that it was best for him to probably take himself out of the mix for a while and just let Democrats negotiate with the White House, because at the end of the day, what really matters is the president saying, yes, I am willing to sign this. And so we're hoping that we'll get an indication very shortly for the first time, really, of not what it is that he won't accept, but what it is that he will accept.
Nancy, going back to the pay for these federal workers who have not been paid now for 2 pay periods, how soon could they see their paychecks if, in fact, as you mentioned, the process it would take to get folks back to vote on this? How soon could they potentially get paid?
Well, I imagine it varies agency by agency. Obviously, both the House and Senate would have to pass a bill funding those parts of the government that have been shut down. The president would have to sign it. That's the first step. And then it depends on each individual agency how quickly it can get its payroll system up and running and turn that back pay around. We do know that some agencies have been trying to make some accommodations. The TSA, for example, just announced this morning that it had repurposed some funds and it was going to be able to provide 1 week's worth of back pay for employees who had been working over the holidays. But it all depends on the agency. But certainly no one is unaware at this point of the kind of financial hardship that a lot of these federal workers have been enduring. There was a study that was done by the New York Times back in 2013, which found that a huge portion of federal workers, something like 2/3 of them, can't go longer than 2 weeks without running out of money if they're not getting a paycheck. It is a really, really difficult situation for people, and that's why when the Commerce Secretary, who's a billionaire himself, Wilbur Ross, said yesterday that he doesn't understand why they're in food bank lines and why they can't just take out a loan if they're running short. That was really seen as a quite a tone-deaf comment from both Democrats and Republicans here on Capitol Hill.
If you're joining us now, senior officials tell CBS News they expect President Trump to show up momentarily to endorse a short-term bill to reopen the government and end the partial shutdown. I'm joined by Chief Congressional Correspondent Nancy Cordes, who's been telling me Senator Richard Shelby says they even aren't aware of exactly what the president might say at this point. Nancy, we know the big face-off between Nancy Pelosi and President Trump ended with the president backing down, saying, OK, I'll wait till the government is open to do my State of the Union. So do you think Nancy Pelosi will wait until, if the president does, in fact, do a 2 or 3 week delay, as we're expecting to allow the government to be opened? Does she wait? Does she wait those 3 weeks or 2 weeks and then say you can have your State of the Union then? Is that another card to play?
That is a great question. I think it depends in part on how hard the president pushes to do his State of the Union as originally scheduled next week, Tuesday. If he says, okay, I've endorsed a short-term spending plan, so now I expect to be able to give my State of the Union address, she may decide, okay, he's at least given a little, and we're not going to stand in the way. I said we should do it when government is reopened, and it is now reopened, at least temporarily. But I think it's all in such flux right now, Rena, that it is really hard to say. It depends on what it is that is in this short-term bill that the president is endorsing. It depends on how quickly they can do it. I mean, a State of the Union address has a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of security that goes along with it, a lot of pomp and circumstance and logistics. And if they get the government back open on Monday, that doesn't give them a ton of time to turn things around. So it just depends on what it is exactly that the president comes out and endorses in the Rose Garden shortly and how quickly Congress can pass it.
All right, our Nancy Cordes, Chief Congressional Correspondent. Nancy, if you can hang with us, I also want to bring in Zeke Miller, who's a CBSN political contributor and a White House reporter for the Associated Press. So, Zeke, tell me what you're hearing.
Well, right now we're hearing a lot of mixed messages, just exactly what the president will come out and say. Even the White House officials don't seem to have a clear understanding. The president really does keep us on our toes often, and this seems to be one of those moments. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill they think the White House and the president is going to agree with this, but they've also seen this rodeo before where it's a little bit Charlie Brown with football, where the president sometimes seems to be embracing a deal and then sometimes doesn't quite follow through. So until the words actually come out from the president's mouth, it's really, that's the guidance we're getting from the Hill, that it's too soon to say that there's an agreement reached just yet.
Zeke, if there is some sort of agreement that the president agrees to open up the government, whether it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever that might be, if that in fact does happen, what do you think was the tipping point? What would have been the tipping point for the president at this point?
Certainly, it's a weakening within the Republican coalition. It's polling showing that his own approval ratings have suffered. It's blame that his party has faced. It's lawmakers on Capitol Hill who have called publicly and broken ranks with the president and the rest of their party to call the president to end the shutdown. All of those things lead to a weakening in his position steadily over the last couple of weeks. And then certainly the recent headlines of just today with the disruptions from the shutdown to federal worker pay, and then to air traffic control today, and the delays. The impacts of the shutdown, which the White House originally thought would be fairly minimal, are spreading and compounding day by day.
Zeke, there's a brand new Washington Post ABC News poll that shows that President Trump's approval rating is 37%. That's down 8 points from 3 months ago. Are those numbers that the White House is concerned about, or do they feel they don't have to focus on that?
Well, at least publicly, the line is often 2020 is a long time away, but they're very acutely aware of the president's standing and with the broader public, and certainly with his base. Trump's base is still very supportive of him. It maybe ticked down a little bit in some of these recent surveys, but if the president doesn't just need his base to win a re-election, they're cognizant of the fact that he's going to have to start campaigning really day by day soon. As Democrats start coming into the field, the president's going to have to be a lot more visible on the campaign trail as well.
I want to also ask you about Roger Stone being indicted today, his home searched as well. When you talk about this big picture. How concerned is the White House? It was clear that Roger Stone wanted to get the message across to the president that he was not going to cooperate. Is that a message? How is the White House responding to that?
The same way we've seen them respond to a whole bunch of these indictments and criminal proceedings in the past, saying that this has nothing to do with the president, but what Stone was, which is not totally accurate, and that what Stone was ultimately charged with was making misstatements to Congress, false statements to Congress, that it was essentially the cover-up, not the underlying crime or allegation against him that got him into trouble. And that they view that as an indication of the president. That's something that we don't really know what the special counsel has, but they've tried to keep the president's distance from Stone, even though they are very close personal friends.
I want to just bring to you some reporting from our Major Garrett, who says that there will, in fact, be, the president is expected in this Rose Garden address in just a few minutes to present a 3-week clean continuing resolution. So what does that mean, Zeke?
Essentially, it means that this whole 5-week shutdown has been futile. That we will be once the government reopens, pretty much where we were before partially shut down 5 weeks ago, 35 days ago, and that there was essentially no need for this. The president didn't really get much out of this. He saw his approval numbers fall. There's a lot of disruption that's caused, and the president didn't get the funding that he wanted for the border wall. We're hearing that there's going to be some sort of vehicle for negotiations over the wall, but those negotiations have been going on day after day, month after month, year after year now since the president's been in Washington, and haven't been fruitful. And now, without any of the pressure of the shutdown, it's not guaranteed that the president's going to get what he wants even after this. So this all could have been avoided. It sort of seems to be where we're at, and didn't really accomplish much of anything.
So if you're the White House at this point, and you know that Nancy Pelosi has won a couple of battles at this point in just a very short time, how do you respond? How do you counter? And is there concern that the president might be losing his Republican support on Capitol Hill?
There certainly were divisions within the Republican Party revealed yesterday as the Senate voted some Republicans crossing over with Democrats. That's an indication that the president has some trouble on his right flank. And when he comes to trying to build the wall, you saw a lot of Republican senators who were and lawmakers in the House who were who campaigned against the wall in some cases, but were willing to follow through with the president because they wanted to stay together for party unity. A lot of that was starting to collapse. So the president's challenge is going to be how does he get all that, you get his team back together to get himself in the best negotiating position to work with them, to work with Democrats and keep the pressure on Democrats to try to fulfill his signature campaign promise. It's not clear that that's going to work. Without the impetus and the pressure of the shutdown, there's really no indication why Democrats would cave now if they hadn't caved in their opposition to the president's on the wall for 5 weeks. Why they would suddenly negotiate on that point now? So it's not clear what the shutdown has accomplished, and if the president really has a plan to sort of get himself out of the hole he's creating the new. It's a short-term continuing resolution. We can be right back into this situation 3 weeks from now.
If you're joining us now, we're standing by waiting for President Trump to address the audience here at the Rose Garden. We are hearing from our Major Garrett. The president will, in fact, endorse a short-term bill. It's a 3-week clean continuing resolution to reopen the government. Zeke, walk us through this. If the president presents this, is the ball then in the Democrats to accept and then to hold the votes in Congress to reopen the government?
Yeah, if you were to accept a clean CR, we've heard from Democrats on the Hill, they've been calling for the president to do this and then start negotiating after the fact. It seemed to be a very quick turnaround from when that would happen to, Congress would have to pass a bill, but likely happen by voice vote. It'd be that non-controversial. There'd be bipartisan support to sort of reopen the government immediately once the president drops his opposition to the wall, and then it would go to the president, and that would begin the process of reopening the government. It'll take, you wouldn't start seeing federal workers, driving in into D.C. this afternoon. It would take a couple of days for federal services to sort of get back up and running and try to undo some of the damage of the shutdown.
And at this point, Zeke, what are you watching for once the president makes this address and you look at the action on Capitol Hill at this point? Who are the key voices in the Republican Party who might be able to make a difference? Is there anybody to try and convince the president on this?
It really is the president's show. I mean, there's certainly some of the Freedom Caucus members who have the president's ear when it comes to things like this. Lindsey Graham has played a role in mediating some of this with the president. But really, it's the president's show, and we need to hear how he messages this to his base, because he said he won't do exactly what he's apparently about to do. And so how will he cast this and cast this shutdown, this 5-week exercise that, to make it seem as though, from his perspective, try to put the spin on it that it wasn't futile, that he actually got something out of it. And it's not clear. That's a really hard task for the president to take, because it's not an easy case to make. Yes, the facts, honest, don't look great for him.
Zeke, if you could hang with us, I want to bring in now CBS News correspondent David Begnaud. He's at Chef Jose Andres World Central Kitchen in Washington, D.C. They're providing those furloughed federal employees meals. David, how are they responding at this point?
Well, what's happening right now is the mayor of Washington, D.C. is actually behind the counter. She's helping to serve some meals. It's turned into a bit of a photo op, to tell you the truth. The mayor jumped in there, and so the cameras are getting a shot. It doesn't seem that a lot of people in here know what is about to happen. We are monitoring CBSN on our phone, waiting for the president's announcement, and we are 8 blocks from the White House. In fact, let me ask this lady. Ma'am, have you heard the news that the president may be announcing his support for a 3-week opening of the government?
I haven't, and that's fabulous news. You look at these lines out here, it's just horrible. So I'm so happy to hear that. I really am.
Are you a federal employee?
I am not. I am here with the council member and the mayor from the District of Columbia.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks for the great news.
Oh, thank you so much. So, ma'am, let me ask you, did you hear that the president may be announcing in a very short period, like the next 5 minutes, that he may open the government for 3 weeks?
Oh, no, I haven't heard that.
What's your reaction?
That's great. As long as we get paid tomorrow or Monday, that would be great.
Amen. Thank you, ma'am. That's what everybody's been saying to us. As long as we can just get paid. Let's ask this lady. Ma'am, have you heard that the president may be announcing an extension to open the government for 3 weeks, and he's going to make that announcement shortly?
Yes.
What's your reaction?
I don't want to say.
You don't want to say?
No.
Okay. All right. You don't have to say. That's fair. I will tell you, though, Rena, a lot of government workers have been very leery to talk on camera, and every one of them has said to us, I'm afraid of being fired. Some even said that they were told by their bosses, don't say a word. And to that point, there's actually next door from where we are, probably, 50 yards away, there's a resource center. And inside that resource center, there are attorneys. And you know what the attorneys are telling workers? Don't boycott your job. A lot of people have asked on social media, why don't the government workers just give the middle finger to the government, right? Why don't they boycott and say, I'm not going back? The attorneys have been telling government workers there's actually a law which says you could be fired and barred from ever working from the federal government again if you do that during this time period. So a lot of government workers, quite frankly, are spooked. But as you can see, most of them have not heard the good news or the news, whatever way you see it, good or bad.
Remarkable to see that they're getting some help there. And as we know and reported yesterday, this happened in 1981, and Ronald Reagan actually did have air traffic controllers fired. So a real lesson indeed. David Begnaud, so grateful to get your reporting on this. Thank you very much. I want to bring in Molly Hooper, who's a CBSN political contributor and Capitol Hill reporter who joins us from the Hill. So, Molly, we saw David trying to talk to those folks on the ground there and just how cagey they were to come on camera and actually talk. What will this mean if the president does decide to open up the government? How long will it take before these folks actually get paid?
Well, and that's the question. What would be included in this short-term deal that's being discussed? Number one, I actually saw a point being made on another network. Since the air traffic controllers, a lot of them aren't showing up for work, how are members even going to get back to D.C. to vote on it? But the House and Senate could agree to do something via unanimous consent where members aren't required to be on the job. And essentially, if there is included in a short-term package a measure that would essentially provide that back pay immediately, that could happen as soon as, I would say, probably Monday or possibly sooner, just depending on what exactly is spelled out in that short-term deal and that is agreed to by all parties. Keep in mind, and I heard the reason why perhaps some federal employees don't want to necessarily talk about a deal at this point because, and this is even reflected on Capitol Hill, you have to wait to hear what the president says because even though there is talk that a deal is imminent, again, the president can change his mind, at the turn of a hat. I mean, he could just turn it on at the turn of a dime. And so that's why there is caution up on Capitol Hill not to necessarily, just like those workers, it seems like, just to not get ahead of the news and wait until the president actually makes his announcement.
Molly, we're also watching the approval ratings here. A new Washington Post ABC News poll shows his approval rating at 37%, disapproval among independents 63%, and then 53% blame President Trump and Republicans for the shutdown. Only 34% blame the Democrats. Are those numbers that the White House is concerned about?
Well, I'm not sure necessarily the White House is as concerned about them as, say, a member of the Senate, a Republican member of the Senate, and which is why we saw yesterday when the Democratic measure to reopen the government immediately through February 8th, not even 3 weeks, I think that's maybe 2 weeks away, that garnered 6 Republican votes. More Republicans switched parties to vote for the Democratic measure than Democrats switched to vote for what would be the president's proposal. And, included in that number, Johnny Isakson, a conservative from Georgia. And that was I think that was quite alarming for even some Democrats were surprised by that. And I think that they are hearing this at home. They're hearing it from their constituents. And keep in mind, it was kind of interesting yesterday, Tim Kaine and former Virginia governor, current Virginia Senator Tim Kaine and Mark Warner had a press event with airline workers and airline security folks at Reagan National Airport. And Tim Kaine said, next time we have one, if this ever happens again, we should make it required that the legislative branch is not funded. I mean, I don't think our staff would like that. But at the same time, these staff members who are manning the phones are hearing from irate constituents and essentially passing that message along to members of the Senate who in turn are responding. So again,
Molly, Molly, I want to ask you.
I can't speak for the White House, but I know members of the Senate are very concerned about this. Republicans are.
We've seen whether it is the travel ban, immigration reform efforts, whatever it has been. How influential is it when folks at home call their representatives on Capitol Hill to complain about it? Does that fall on deaf ears?
I got to tell you, and there's been some instances over the past few years that I've covered Capitol Hill when certain issues will light up the switchboard on Capitol Hill, and you can't even call into offices because constituents are pounding, constituents. And as long as they are from constituents in the district, constituents in the state, not out-of-state folks, these senators respond. And what's interesting in this situation is the Hill reported this yesterday. Shortly after it happened, Republican senators met with Mike Pence before the votes at 2:30 p.m. And they had a closed-door meeting, and essentially Mike Pence was read the riot act. Republican senators don't know what the strategy is here. They're getting hit hard. They're actually also concerned about security issues. Keep in mind, the very department that is not getting funded at this point was created back in 2004 in response to the 9/11 terror attack. And even though essential workers are showing up for work, and other, and actually more workers have been recruited to come back to work, they're not getting paid. And that's a very stressful situation for anybody. But to be compelled to show up for your job and not receive pay and not be able to pay your bills, that causes more stress. And I've talked to one senator who said, what's this going to take, a national tragedy? Is it going to take another attack? Dots that we can't connect because the person there who would be connecting those dots isn't on the job. And so there is a lot of concern from Republicans on this because, again, let me go back to that first point. They wanted to know from Mike Pence, what is the strategy here? And the answer was unclear.
If you're joining us now, we are standing by awaiting the president to make a formal address. We are told he wants to address the shutdown, is our understanding, and that he might likely present a 3-week clean continuing resolution, which will hopefully end the longest government shutdown in American history. I want to bring back Zeke Miller in. He's at the White House, CBSN contributor. So, Zeke, at this point, what's your sense of where the White House is going?
Well, this is essentially will amount to a walk back from the White House from where the president has been on the record demanding more wall funding in order to reopen the government for weeks now. And they haven't had a whole lot to show for it other than disruption that the shutdown caused, drops in the President and the Republican Party's approval numbers over the past several weeks. And so it's going to be interesting to see how the President is going to message what is essentially a cave. He said he wouldn't do this, and if he wanted to reopen the government, he could have done this at any day over the last 5 weeks, and he didn't. He is today because he's feeling the pressure and the heat. That we've not seen the President in this situation very much at all. So it will be very interesting to see how the tone that he takes. Does he try to somehow declare victory when there really is none to be seen here? It'll be very, very interesting to see how this plays out.
I was just going to make that point too and ask you. This is a president who does not like to say "I've been defeated." How does he spin this at this point?
We're hearing already from some people close to his orbit that he's going to say it partially funds the wall because of the clean CR, and there was some border wall funding that was still in the federal budget.
But my understanding is that was going to be there, right? This wasn't some last-minute thing that the Democrats caved on. My understanding was that was, to fix parts of the wall, I believe, but it was already in there?
Exactly. He didn't get anything new, and this whole exercise was about getting something new, and that's the challenge for the President. He can't point to anything that he's going to sign today that he couldn't have gotten 5 weeks ago before this whole shutdown began.
If you're joining us now, we are standing by, waiting for the President any moment. What's fascinating, I'm joined by Molly Hooper and Zeke Miller joining me now. What's fascinating is we've heard from our Nancy Cortez on Capitol Hill, who said that Senator Shelby told her that they don't fully know exactly what the President is going to say at this point. And for those of the reporters who have covered him have also said you sometimes don't know until he shows up to the podium. Our understanding, based on reporting from our White House team led by Major Garrett, that there will be a 3-week clean continuing resolution. But as everyone knows, when you deal with the President, you just don't know until he comes out and says it at this point. I want to bring back in Molly Hooper. Molly, when you're talking about gaming this on Capitol Hill, what are Republicans on Capitol Hill who were forced to go on record yesterday, what are they most concerned about at this point now?
Well, again, I mean, there's several things that they're concerned about. Number one, no winners. Number two, really, in this situation, the President, Democrats have said point blank, this is the position. We are not going to negotiate if the government is shut down and when the government is shut down. We're not going to talk to you about a wall. We're not going to talk to you about border security. We're not going to talk to you about anything until it's reopened. And so the point that Democrats have over the past week, I've seen them really trying to hit that point home and say, listen, you have people like Tim Kaine, you have other Democrats who say, we want to deal on border security. We've supported border security in the past. You've seen us support border security in the past. It might not be a concrete wall, but guess what? We're not even going to talk about that until the government's reopened, and then we can talk about it, which is one reason why Lindsey Graham has been really, really pushing the President, and he did this, and he likes to point this out, but he made a similar point, 5 weeks ago. Just make sure the government's open for 3 weeks. I'm telling you, Democrats, we have enough of them who can work with us on border security. We can massage it. We can make it a win. But you've got to make sure that you give us breathing room so we don't have to worry about federal workers who are not getting paid, who can't pay their bills. And it turns into a completely different matter than what the original intent was, to get money for your border wall or border security. There's a deal to be had here, which is something that Lindsey Graham has been saying since the beginning. Mm-hmm. But the President just needs to know Democrats are not going to show up at all when the government is not running. And I heard from one Democrat yesterday close to Pelosi who said, listen, if you think Nancy Pelosi is bluffing, you got another thing coming because she can wait you out. And she has. And so perhaps the President can spin this in a way that he says, okay, you're right. We're reopening the government, but guess what? We finally got Democrats to come to the table and talk to us about real border security. However, again, he had to reopen the government to do that.
I want to ask Zeke Miller. We're talking about Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi has managed to get the President not to deliver his State of the Union as she had tried, won that battle. And potentially we might hear from the President now, expected to get the government opening is the reporting we're hearing. So that would have been 2 big wins in just a short period since this Congress has been in session. What does this say? Is Nancy Pelosi the one who should take the credit for this?
It does seem to be her ability to outmaneuver the President seems to be on display here time and time again. She's somebody who's been around Washington, been in politics for a very long time. She's been Speaker before. She knows how to know where the levers of power are and how to wield them. And we're seeing some of that play out today. She always had the more leverage than the president in the shutdown fight, and certainly as time went on, she found ways to sort of increase, get herself a better hand, while the president really never quite found a message to stick to, never really found a way to effectively communicate that to the American people. We saw differing messages, whether it's just tweets or speeches, or sometimes just being out of the public eye for days. Where Pelosi had a very consistent, clear message all the way through, and that's probably sort of when the history of this will be written, that will be why the outcome is what it was, that Pelosi and Schumer, the Democrats, stuck together, and Republicans were the ones who ultimately cracked.
In addition to the shutdown, which we are waiting on the president to address any moment now, we are also been monitoring the Roger Stone indictment, the raid on his home by the FBI early this morning. Zeke, I want to ask you about that at this point. What's been the temperature at the White House on this story?
There's certainly a bit of concern about generally that more people in the president's orbit are finding themselves in criminal jeopardy. But they sort of saw this one coming. Roger Stone has been talking openly about his lawyers' negotiations with the Mueller team and his interviews, that this is kind of an expected outcome. And the White House is sort of maintaining what they have when it's come to all of these criminal actions before, is that this doesn't directly implicate the president. So that's sort of the official White House response. But beneath that, there is certainly a level of unease.
All right, I want to also check back with our David Begnaud, who's on the ground in Washington, D.C., speaking with some of these furloughed workers who are getting some meals. David, what can you tell us?
Well, Rena, the chef Jose Andres is joining me now. So you heard that the president's going to come out, right? CBS News is reporting he's going to back a short-term deal, maybe 3 weeks to reopen the government. You're not Donald Trump's biggest fan. That much is known. But I wonder what you make of this news.
Well, I mean, he's my president, and as a president, I respect him. He got to the White House, I believe, on the premise that he was the best deal maker in the history. I am a little businessman. He's a very big businessman and our president. So I do believe the pressure was on him on coming with a good deal for all the American people. So I hope it's true, but 3 weeks looks to me like still we're letting down the American people.
I talked to a woman who was sitting in a corner booth a short time ago, and she had the news playing on her phone as she was eating some of the soup that your people cook for her. And she said, I just hope he doesn't go back on his word, because she said sometimes you never know what he says, whether it's going to hold true 24 hours later. Will you continue, if he comes out, let's say he walks out right now and says, I will back a bill to open the government. Are you going to shut down tonight?
Well, listen, I think everybody wants normalcy. I don't think anybody wants to be in these lines. I think everybody wants to go back to their normal lives without thinking what's going to happen in 3 months or in 3 weeks. So us as an NGO, we will be here for the people as far as the people need our help. As soon as they get their first paycheck, probably we should be slowly closing down. Why? Because we are an NGO for emergencies. We shouldn't be open in Washington, D.C. Well, so what I can tell you is that if this arrives to a happy conclusion and we reopen the government, what we're going to do is keep a few more days until people go back to their normal lives. If they shut down the government again, I can tell you we will reopen again.
It's sobering to hear you say, we operate only in emergencies, because I feel like ever since Puerto Rico, where you and I first met, I feel like you've constantly been serving food for the last year and a half.
Well, we've been serving food for many more years before that. What happened the last year and a half has been a lot of events happening that I have a feeling like we have to be there. World Central Kitchen has to be there. And it's not me, as you see. We have thousands of volunteers, David, across the country. Today, I can claim we are in 20 states, plus Puerto Rico, plus Washington, D.C. We already have officially 150 restaurants, and I hope by the end of today I can claim a much bigger number.
So the chef's got somebody working for him who actually does all the shopping. So every bit of food that they're preparing right now in the kitchen behind me has been purchased by World Central Kitchen, and you get your money through donations, right?
Yeah, we are an NGO, 501c3. People are very supportive. We have all kinds of donors, from $1 to big corporations. It's all of the above. But again, we are not the only people. We need to remember that we have many private businesses. My businesses are open, but my friends, they are all supporting this initiative all across the country. Pepco, Verizon, Uber, the big corporations are really coming in a big way supporting the American people.
I should tell you that they opened the doors at 11 a.m. today, and by 12 noon, there had to have been, I'd say, 500 people wrapped around the side of the building. And a lot of the people came up saying, in fact, I met one guy who said, "This is my 7th day in a row."
You know why this location is very important? Equal distance from White House and Congress, and the building across, the National Archives, the two most important documents in the creation of our nation. We, the people, we need to remind our politicians that government is here to serve the people, not the people to be hostage of their lack of leadership. So I'm happy to be here because the message it sends, and I think people like to be together. They don't feel alone. And being in line at the beginning was kind of awkward, but now everybody believes that together they're stronger. And this line, it's sending a big message. That's why we had so many senators and congressmen coming through these doors.
Well, look, you had Amy Klobuchar today, who arguably may announce she's running for president. You had the mayor of Washington, D.C. just a short time ago, right? So every day you've had people come through. But again, to go on the record, if they open the government tomorrow, you don't plan to close tomorrow?
No, we will stay a few more days until we believe the situation is stable. We need to remember that these many mothers, single mothers, 2, 3 children, that already they are missing one check, about to miss the second check. Contractors. We have contractors, they will never get that money back, ever. Many of them are already losing their job. So the problem is real. We're talking about 5, 6, 7 million people. And imagine this keeps going on. Food stamps. We're talking that we may be about having 20, 25 million Americans going hungry. We cannot allow our government to do this with the American people. We can't. Thank you.
Thank you, amigo. Thank you, thank you. Let's ask some government workers. Ladies, if I may for a moment, we're live on CBSN. Have you heard that the government, that the president may in a very short period of time announce that he's backing a 3-week reopening of the government?
Yes, we did hear that. And
your reaction?
Relieved to hear that that's going to happen. So I think it's a good move that they're going to reopen the government, and hopefully that'll be a full opening and they can negotiate whatever they need to negotiate, and we can work and meet our work, do our work.
You, ma'am?
Yes, no, absolute relief. We actually heard it while we were standing in line today, and I think it's about time. I hope that it is a little more sustainable than 3 weeks, so we're not going through this again in 3 weeks. But certainly good news, and hopefully this is the last day that Mr. Andres will have to run this, and he can move on to doing his good work elsewhere. But we're grateful.
Rena, raw reaction coming from the food line as we are just 8 blocks away from the White House waiting for the president to speak.
Our David Begnaud on the ground with some of those furloughed workers and Chef Jose Andres. David, thank you very much. Well, if you're joining us now, we are about 40 minutes delayed. The president was expected about 40 minutes ago to come out to the Rose Garden. That shot you see right there. It's not clear exactly what the holdup is at this point. He was also supposed to meet with mayors of various parts throughout the country today, this afternoon, and also with Hispanic clergy. So he does have some other things planned, but obviously big focus today is, has the president reached some sort of agreement to open the government and allow those furloughed workers to potentially receive a paycheck after missing 2 weeks of pay? I want to bring in Molly Hooper and Zeke Miller, who join me right now. Molly, I want to head to you first. Our understanding, and as I've reported throughout the afternoon, we don't know what the president says until he says it. But our understanding is that this will be a 3-week continuing resolution. It'll open up the government, but there will be no new border wall funding. Is that what you're hearing?
That is what I'm hearing. Yesterday, Nancy Pelosi basically said, when the idea came up of a temporary, of a short-term resolution, this idea that the president was going to get some sort of prorated money for the wall. She said, "What are you talking about? I have not agreed to anything like that. I don't even think he knows what he's talking about." No, that's, there won't be anything additional. It would just be the funding that's currently in place, or that's supposed to be currently in place, that was in place for the 2019, for the 2018 fiscal year. Those levels will just be continued through what would be maybe February 15th, I believe. That's about 3 weeks. But again, the numbers will not change. They will not go up. Usually every year there's more money, less money, whatever it is. Nothing like that would happen. It would just be a continuation of the funding that's currently in place for those departments.
Zeke, I want to turn to you. You know, the president's chief of staff plays an important role in previous presidencies, especially with dealing with Congress. Mick Mulvaney holds that position. How effective has he been in dealing with the government, with the folks on Capitol Hill?
Mulvaney has some relationships. He's a former member of Congress, but he has not been sort of taking the aggressive lead on this. Jared Kushner and Mike Pence have sort of been off in the face of these negotiations, and the little negotiations were going on over the last 5 weeks. And certainly they were the ones who were instrumental in drafting the president's proposal that he introduced Saturday, which didn't really really go anywhere, but did sort of ultimately lay a bit of the groundwork and start the conversations that did lead to where we are now. One of the things talking to folks on the Hill about Mulvaney has been is that he was kind of a backbencher in the House. He was a founding member of the House Freedom Caucus. He was more about sort of blowing things up and stirring up trouble within his own party than he ever was about reaching across the party lines. He never really successfully passed any major legislation that he's introduced, and that's the sort of thing that contributed to sort of his relationship. He doesn't have a whole lot of credibility with some of those members.
Mike Pence is someone who has walked those halls and worked the jobs that these folks in Congress have worked. What kind of credibility does he have, and how are Republicans dealing with him at this point? What's their take on Mike Pence?
He's certainly familiar with all those members. He campaigned for a lot of them in 2018. He brings a lot to the table there. At the same time, he's not the president, and we've seen that often the president and the vice president haven't always been on the same page here. And members of Congress, when they deal with Mike Pence or anyone else, they question just how in tune they are in sync with the president's thinking at any given moment. They have a strategy meeting in the morning, and then the president's mind changes by the afternoon. They're very mindful of that when the vice president agrees to something, that it may not stick for very long, and that's not an indictment of Mike Pence's credibility. It means that nobody really speaks for Donald Trump other than Donald Trump.
And I have just been told by my producer we have gotten a 2-minute warning. The president is expected to finally come out in about 2 minutes' time. And our understanding, for those of you joining us, we believe he is going to offer a 3-week continuing resolution, a 3-week agreement to open the government, no new border wall money, and hopefully that will lead to those furloughed workers to allow them to return to work, which has been the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. I want to turn now to Molly. Molly, do we have Molly still?
Oh, I'm here.
Okay, great, Molly. Thanks for hanging with us. We expect the president to jump onto that podium any moment now. But what are you hearing at this point from folks on Capitol Hill? If the president does decide on this continuing resolution, what would happen next?
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Again, it's a matter of if Nancy Pelosi does agree with this pretty much, and she's talked to her caucus, and there aren't any objections, and Republicans don't have objections on their side, which actually could be more of a problem, then the House, conceivably, they could actually just agree to this via UC, unanimous consent. Same thing could be done in the Senate. Otherwise, the House leadership said that they'll give their members 24 hours to return to D.C. to take a vote. But keep in mind, what with all of the delays in the airlines and the flights, it's unclear if all the members could make it back in 24 hours. So that's something that will need to be worked out amongst the leadership. But if there is a deal agreed to, then once that happens, Congress should be able to pass something within the next day or two.
And it looks like it's always interesting to see how the folks position, whether it's the flags in the background. We know I believe the president's address was just placed on the podium there. It's also interesting to see who the president has standing behind him in events like this. And will there be anybody, or will the president just show up by himself? We know members of the cabinet are there on the ground who will be seated, but be curious to say if there's anybody who will be behind the president at this point. Zeke, I want to ask you, we were talking a little bit about Mike Pence. What do you think, if the president agrees to finally reopen the government, what do you think it might have been that got him to tip and turn, and who would be that person in his ear that he would listen to?
It's certainly the pressure that's been mounting within his own party for the president to find some sort of resolution there. He's been hearing that from Republican senators over the last couple of days. Lindsey Graham has been one of them. He's in the president's ear a lot. but at the same, is looking at the poll numbers that have been showing a weakness in his position. Those are things he's certainly attuned to as well. And partly this was just presented to him by lawmakers on Capitol Hill as what they were going to do. They got the president's buy-in later on in the process, and that's partly why we're still so concerned about what the president, will and won't say in this podium in just a couple of minutes. Because this was not something that they were very involved with from the very beginning. This is something the president long said he wouldn't do, and here he is embracing it in part because Mitch McConnell and Democrats, have sorted this all out and then presented it to the White House as what they were going to do.
It's interesting. I just noticed a tweet from a Washington Post reporter who, as we're also monitoring, our Chris Van Cleve transportation correspondent, has been monitoring very closely the FAA and these was essentially a shutdowns at airports. Folks are not able to take off as usual. And one Washington Post reporter tweeting out here, as my flight at LaGuardia prepares to take off an hour late, a frazzled flight attendant tells us, you all know why there's a delay, so please be patient. And then the pilot jumps in to make clear that the government shutdown is the cause of the delay. Molly, it's hard to escape the public court of opinion here on this.
That's true. And keep in mind, when you have 435 members of Congress going home pretty much every week, last night they had to go home, or they were cleared to go home because the House wasn't going to vote this today. Quite a few of them mentioned to me, they said, I don't know how long it's going to take home. You have members who fly back to California every week. And this is going to be an issue trying to get them back. So again, the leaders want to make sure that they hear the president say what probably they anticipate him to say. But again, it's one of the reasons why you probably haven't seen Mitch McConnell, in the background.
Molly,
at the
potentially,
event.
I'm hearing we might actually hear from McConnell on the floor about the shutdown. If that's the case, what does that tell you?
Well, that would be a good sign. That would be a good sign. And again, it's unclear if he would appear before the president speaks or after the president speaks. But, one thing that the Senate, again, this is one of his favorite sayings, is you don't want to get kicked by a mule tooth for the second time. And he was kicked. He was kicked by the president at the end of December when the Senate essentially green-lighted an extension, a temporary extension
Molly,
of funding.
I apologize. We've got the
decided not
president
to.
right now at the Rose Garden and waiting to hear what he has to say.
My
Let's
fellow
listen in.
Americans, I am very proud to announce today that we have reached a deal to end the shutdown and reopen the federal government. As everyone knows, I have a very powerful alternative, but I didn't want to use it at this time. Hopefully it will be unnecessary. I want to thank all of the incredible federal workers and their amazing families who have shown such extraordinary devotion in the face of this recent hardship. You are fantastic people. You are incredible patriots. Many of you have suffered far greater than anyone but your families would know or understand. And not only did you not complain, but in many cases you encouraged me to keep going because you care so much about our country and about its border security. Again, I thank you. All Americans, I thank you. You are very, very special people. I am so proud that you are citizens of our country. When I say make America great again, it could never be done without you. Great people. In a short while, I will sign a bill to open our government for 3 weeks until February 15th. I will make sure that all employees receive their back pay very quickly or as soon as possible. It'll happen fast. I am asking Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to put this proposal on the floor immediately. After 36 days of spirited debate and dialogue, I have seen and heard from enough Democrats and Republicans that they are willing to put partisanship aside, I think, and put the security of the American people first. I do believe they're going to do that. They have said they are for complete border security, and they have finally and fully acknowledged that having barriers, fencing, or walls, or whatever you want to call it, will be an important part of the solution. A bipartisan conference committee of House and Senate lawmakers and leaders will immediately begin reviewing the requests of our Homeland Security experts, and experts they are, and also law enforcement professionals who have worked with us so closely. We want to thank Border Patrol, ICE, and all law enforcement. Been incredible. Based on operational guidance from the experts in the field, they will put together a Homeland Security package for me to shortly sign into law. Over the next 21 days, I expect that both Democrats and Republicans will operate in good faith. This is an opportunity for all parties to work together for the benefit of our whole beautiful, wonderful nation. If we make a fair deal, the American people will be proud of their government for proving that we can put country before party. We can show all Americans and people all around the world that both political parties are united when it comes to protecting our country and protecting our people. Many disagree. But I really feel that working with Democrats and Republicans, we can make a truly great and secure deal happen for everyone. Walls should not be controversial. Our country has built 654 miles of barrier over the last 15 years, and every career Border Patrol agent I have spoken with has told me that walls work. They do work. No matter where you go, they work. Israel built a wall, 99.9% successful. Won't be any different for us. They keep criminals out. They save good people from attempting a very dangerous journey from other countries, thousands of miles, because they think they have a glimmer of hope of coming through. With a wall, they don't have that hope. They keep drugs out, and they dramatically increase efficiency by allowing us to patrol far larger areas with far fewer people. It's just common sense. Walls work. That's why most of the Democrats in Congress have voted in the past for bills that include walls and physical barriers and very powerful fences. The walls we are building are not medieval walls. They are smart walls designed to meet the needs of frontline border agents and are operationally effective. These barriers are made of steel, have see-through visibility, which is very important, and are equipped with sensors, monitors, and cutting-edge technology, including state-of-the-art drones. We do not need 2,000 miles of concrete wall from sea to shiny sea. We never did. We never proposed that. We never wanted that, because we have barriers at the border where natural structures are as good as anything that we can build. They're already there. They've been there for millions of years. Our proposed structures will be in predetermined high-risk locations that have been specifically identified by the Border Patrol to stop illicit flows of people and drugs. No border security plan can ever work without a physical barrier. Just doesn't happen. At the same time, we need to increase drug detection technology and manpower to modernize our ports of entry, which are obsolete. The equipment's obsolete. They're old. They're tired. This is something we have all come to agree on and will allow for quicker and safer commerce. These critical investments will improve and facilitate legal trade and travel through our lawful ports of entry. Our plan also includes desperately needed humanitarian assistance for those being exploited and abused by coyotes, smugglers, and the dangerous journey north. The requests we have put before Congress are vital to ending the humanitarian and security crisis on our southern border. Absolutely vital. Will not work without it. This crisis threatens the safety of our country and thousands of American lives. Criminal cartels, narco-terrorists, transnational gangs like MS-13, and human traffickers are brazenly violating U.S. laws and terrorizing innocent communities. Human traffickers. The victims are women and children, maybe to a lesser extent, believe it or not, children. Women are tied up, they're bound, duct tape put around their faces, around their mouths. In many cases, they can't even breathe. They're put in the backs of cars or vans or trucks. They don't go through your port of entry. They make a right turn going very quickly. They go into the desert areas or whatever areas you can look at. And as soon as there's no protection, they make a left or a right into the United States of America. There's nobody to catch them. There's nobody to find them. They can't come through the port, because if they come through the port, people will see 4 women sitting in a van with tape around their face and around their mouth. Can't have that. And that problem, because of the internet, is the biggest problem. It's never been like this before that you can imagine. It's at the worst level, human trafficking, in the history of the world. This is not a United States problem. This is a world problem. But they come through areas where they have no protection, where they have no steel barriers, where they have no walls. And we can stop almost 100% of that. The profits reaped by these murderous organizations are used to fund their malign and destabilizing conduct throughout this hemisphere. Last year alone, ICE officers removed 10,000 known or suspected gang members like MS-13 and members as bad as them. Horrible people, tough, mean, sadistic. In the last 2 years, ICE officers arrested a total of 266,000 criminal aliens inside of the United States, including those charged or convicted of nearly 100,000 assaults, 30,000 sex crimes, and 4,000 homicides, or, as you would call them, violent, vicious killings. Can be stopped. Vast quantities of lethal drugs, including meth, fentanyl, heroin, and cocaine, are smuggled across our southern border and into U.S. schools and communities. Drugs kill much more than 70,000 Americans a year and cost our society in excess of $700 billion. The sheer volume of illegal immigration has overwhelmed federal authorities and stretched our immigration system beyond the breaking point. Nearly 50 migrants a day are being referred for medical assistance. They're very, very sick, making this a health crisis as well. It's a very big health crisis. People have no idea how big it is unless you're there. Our backlog in the immigration courts is now far greater than the 800,000 cases that you've been hearing about over the last couple of years. Think of that, though. 800,000 cases because our laws are obsolete. So obsolete. They're the laughingstock all over the world. Our immigration laws, all over the world, they've been there for a long time, are the laughingstock all over the world. We do not have the necessary space or resources to detain, house, vet, screen, and safely process this tremendous influx of people. In short, we do not have control over who is entering our country, where they come from, who they are, why they are coming. The result for many years is a colossal danger to public safety. We're going to straighten it out. It's not hard. It's easy if given the resources. Last month was the third straight month in a row with 60,000 apprehensions on our southern border. Think of that. We apprehended 60,000 people. That's like a stadium full of people, a big stadium. There are many criminals being apprehended, but vast numbers are coming because our economy is so strong. We have the strongest economy now in the entire world. You see what's happening. We have nowhere left to house them and no way to promptly remove them. We can't get them out because our laws are so obsolete, so antiquated, and so bad. Without new resources from Congress, we will be forced to release these people into communities, something we don't want to do, called catch and release. You catch them. Even if they're criminals, you then release them. And you can't release them from where they came, so they go into our country and end up in places you would least suspect. And we do as little releasing as possible, but they're coming by the hundreds of thousands. I have had 0 Democrat lawmakers volunteer to have them released into their districts or states, and I think they know that, and that's what we're going to be discussing over the next 3 weeks. The painful reality is that the tremendous economic and financial burdens of illegal immigration fall on the shoulders of low-income Americans, including millions of wonderful, patriotic, law-abiding immigrants who enrich our nation. As Commander-in-Chief, my highest priority is the defense of our great country. We cannot surrender operational control over the nation's borders to foreign cartels, traffickers, and smugglers. We want future Americans to come to our country legally and through a system based on merit. We need people to come to our country. We have great companies moving back into the United States. And we have the lowest employment and the best employment numbers that we've ever had. There are more people working today in the United States than have ever worked in our country. We need people to come in to help us on the farms and with all of these great companies that are moving back. Finally, they're moving back. People said it couldn't happen. It's happening. And we want them to enjoy the blessings of safety and liberty and the rule of law. We cannot protect and deliver these blessings without a strong and secure border. I believe that crime in this country can go down by a massive percentage if we have great security on our southern border. I believe drugs, large percentages of which come through the southern border, will be cut by a number that nobody will believe. So let me be very clear. we really have no choice but to build a powerful wall or steel barrier. If we don't get a fair deal from Congress, the government will either shut down on February 15th again, or I will use the powers afforded to me under the laws and the Constitution of the United States to address this emergency. We will have great security, and I want to thank you all very much. Thank you very much.
President, were you aware Roger Stone was updating your campaign on WikiLeaks?
Question thrown to the president, who did not respond. Were you aware that the campaign was being updated on WikiLeaks, reference to Roger Stone, who was in fact indicted and his home raided today? The president, though, the big announcement is that he said he was proud to announce that they have reached a deal to end the government shutdown. I want to bring in from California, joining me now, Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, who serves on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, I want to first get your reaction that the president has decided to reopen the government. Is this a time for a victory lap for Democrats?
No, it's time to open up government, make sure people who are working finally get paid after 35 days of doing so without, and contractors connected to the federal government can get their contracts back in order. And of course, continue to have conversations about what best protects our southern border. But no, this is just time to move forward.
There are words that the president said that I have not heard him say before when he talks about that wall. Smart wall, drone, see-through visibility, drug detection technology. What do you make of his wording today when he talks about border security?
Well, we're going to have border security, and we're going to increase the number of agents. We're going to increase what we do at the ports of entry where drugs are able to get through. 90% of the drugs that come to our country go through the ports of entry. We're going to increase technology, whether it's through cameras or drones. And where barriers are needed, yes, we will put them up in place. But you're not going to see the contiguous sea to shining sea wall that the president wants. That's not effective, and it's also not the right symbol for America.
You know, the president says that after 3 weeks, he's willing to shut down the government again. Would you be willing to negotiate a deal that would include funding for his wall?
No, and I don't like that after saying he was going to reopen government, he went back to that same position. It's almost as if he hasn't learned the lesson in the pain of the last 35 days. But I believe that the public sentiment and the stories we've heard of what this has meant to workers, has really, I think, put pressure on the Senate Republicans, and that's why the president is doing this. I can't imagine, I hope that's not the case, that we would be in the same position in just a few short weeks.
Do you think it's likely we will be in the same position in 3 weeks?
Well, it's ridiculous that we are even in this position now that we can't do a long-term funding of the government, that this president isn't able to, govern us beyond just the next few weeks. But I believe this is kind of the off-ramp the president needed, and the sentiment of the country has never used the government, never used shutting down the government as a way to get around the legislative process.
Congressman, I want to move on and ask you about Roger Stone being charged in the Russia investigation. When you look at his indictment, what stands out most to you?
When you read Roger Stone's indictment, what leaps off the page is the fact that a senior Trump campaign official was in contact with Roger Stone about obtaining the Russian-hacked Hillary Clinton emails that would help Donald Trump. Now, where I come from, the only person that could order a senior official in any organization would be someone who is more senior than that official. So you now see evidence that at the very top of the Trump campaign, there was an intense effort to get the Russian-hacked emails that were hacked to hurt the Clinton campaign.
He's made it clear he will plead not guilty and, in his words, not bear false witness against the president. When you hear that, what's your reaction to his reaction?
Well, it's time to come clean, Mr. Stone, and most of the witnesses who have pled guilty have done so, with the exception of Mr. Manafort. Rick Gates is a cooperator. Michael Flynn is a cooperator. Michael Cohen is a cooperator, and they're going to serve less time in jail because they did so.
The White House doesn't appear to be concerned based on their statements today. Should they be?
They should be very concerned. You're seeing the president's longtime friend for decades, Roger Stone, now indicted. You're seeing Paul Manafort, his campaign chairperson, Michael Cohen, his lawyer, his national security advisor. It's just hard to imagine that so many people at such high levels, so close to Donald Trump, were able to pull off these efforts to try and work with the Russians or to lie and cover it up, and Donald Trump didn't know about it.
You sit on the Intelligence Committee's Russia investigation looking into this. What do you want to know? What are the missing pieces you want filled in?
I want to know on the Intelligence Committee, I want to know what we can best do going forward to prevent another attack from happening. The way you do that is to understand fully what the Russians did in the last campaign. We weren't able to do that because the Republicans wouldn't allow us to subpoena witnesses and documents. We are able to do that now, but we should make sure the American people know this is always about going forward, making sure that they don't do this again by closing vulnerabilities and making sure the government responds in a better way when an attack like this comes.
Is there anyone you want to subpoena?
Well, you know, I'll leave it to Mr. Schiff to sign the subpoenas, but I know that he has talked about adding into our inquiry a money laundering piece to this, something we weren't able to pursue last time. But there is a lot of evidence that Russian money was flowing into the Trump organization. If you just listen to the words of Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, they both boasted about that. And then the Trump bank, Deutsche Bank, in 2017 was fined over $300 million for a $10 billion Russian money laundering scheme. So you can link the Trump organization and money coming in, and the lender that was being used is having ties to Russian money laundering, and I think you have reason to look.
Do you want Roger Stone to come back and testify?
I'll leave that to Mr. Schiff. I'll just say this: he's lied, and now he's been charged with lying in the Mueller campaign or the Mueller investigation. They're going to, I imagine, put the screws to him and see if he wants to be a cooperator. But I'll leave that to Mr. Schiff.
We know Michael Cohen was subpoenaed by the Senate Intelligence Committee this week. He postponed his testimony before the House Oversight Committee alleging threats against him. Is your committee considering compelling Cohen to testify?
We would like to hear from Mr. Cohen, and Mr. Schiff, again, I know is doing all he can to make sure that happens. And what's important about this testimony is that we not allow a bully to intimidate a witness. Mr. Cohen's already done the hard part. He's broken away from the Trump organization. He's come clean. And so now we just need him to get across the finish line, be protected if there are threats against him, but show the courage that he showed when he broke away and tell the American people what happened. And he should also not underestimate what his courage could do for other people who continue to lie right now and protect the president, who may know that's not the right thing to do and may also want to come forward and assist in the investigation.
Congressman, before I let you go, I hear that you are hiring in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. Are you running?
Yes, send us your resumes. I am considering it, and I am going to be back in Iowa this weekend. I believe that the promise of our country is if you work hard, you do better for yourself and dream bigger for your kids. That's something my parents chase, but I don't see it being fulfilled on every block and on every floor of every building. So I want to make sure that we have new energy, new ideas, and a new confidence in America, and I'm going to make a decision about how I can help make sure that happens very soon. Congressman
Eric Swalwell, thank you very much, Congressman, for joining us.
Thanks, Rena. My pleasure.
I want to bring back in Molly Hooper, CBSN political contributor and Capitol Hill reporter for The Hill. So, Molly, 3 weeks from now, are we going to be back in the same position?
Sorry, that's more of an exasperated kind of chuckle because who knows? We might very well be. However, at least in the interim, regardless of what happens, the president did make that I don't know if you want to say promise/threat. I don't know what a better word to describe it is, but he said, listen, I have my options available to me, and it will get done, referring to the national emergency powers that he has at his disposal for this issue that he thinks he could use. But it's a precedent that a lot of Republicans, including Marco Rubio, don't want the president to set, because if the president sets that precedent, the next president, whoever it is, Democrat, Republican, can use it as well. And so that's something that Republicans do not want to happen. That said, there are a number of meetings going on Capitol Hill among Senate Republicans and Democrats, led by Lindsey Graham and some key Democratic senators who do want to discuss a way forward on border security. They are interested in, picking up on the president's original proposal. Well, I should say his second original proposal. The idea of perhaps getting permanency for the individuals, the kids who were brought here by their parents, no fault of their own, so-called DACA recipients, giving them permanency in this country, a green card, in exchange for more money going towards border security. Again, depends on what one's definition of a wall is. That will definitely be fleshed out, and it's being fleshed out now. But again, there could be a deal to be made, a broader deal to be made. And now the Democrats need to step up and they need to start talking and negotiating, because if they don't, President Trump is very likely to make good on this threat, and Republicans know that. And if you talk to a number of the Senate Republicans, especially the ones who voted to reopen the government yesterday with that Democratic bill, they don't want to go through this again. They don't want to. And, in the next 3 weeks, we'll be seeing a lot of negotiating.
I'm curious, we haven't heard much from Mitch McConnell, Molly. Have you heard from other Republicans? Actually, speaking of Mitch McConnell, he is speaking on the Senate floor.
Well, I was glad to see today the president's announcement that he and our Democratic colleagues have reached an agreement that will immediately reopen the government while providing the room to negotiate a funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security. Further, negotiations on DHS will be prioritized over consideration of any other funding bills. So with cooperation, we can pass legislation opening the government and send the DHS appropriations bill to a conference with the House today. I'm glad the closed portions of the federal government will reopen and get back online. I'm glad that the dedicated men and women of the Coast Guard, law enforcement, the TSA, and all the other federal employees will not have to go longer without pay for their work and will receive their back pay. I know the pain that this episode has caused to many Kentuckians and to people all over our country. They deserve this resolution. So going forward, I hope our Democratic friends will stay true to the commitment they've stated constantly over the past weeks, that once the government was reopened, they'd be perfectly willing to negotiate in good faith on a full year of government funding that would include a significant investment in urgently needed border security measures, including physical barriers. After all, the only way the federal workers are going to have stability and certainty beyond the next 3 weeks, the only way our border is going to have real security, is if Democrats will stop playing partisan games and get serious about negotiating with the president on a long-term compromise. The days ahead will tell us whether our Democratic colleagues are actually serious about securing our nation, whether they actually mean what they say. So the president's called on the Senate to act on these proposals, and now that there's an agreement between the Democrats and the White House, we can make that happen.
That was Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell speaking after the president has agreed to back a short-term bill that would open up the government. I want to bring in CBS News Chief Congressional Correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, you and I were just talking earlier. I apologize, Nancy. We've got Senator Schumer now. Let's listen in.
The president has agreed to our request to open the government and then debate border security, which is great news for 800,000 federal workers and millions of Americans who depend on government services. I want to thank President Trump and Leader McConnell. As just outlined, we have agreed to pass a clean 3-week continuing resolution to reopen the government. Also, we will pass legislation in the Senate related to the Department of Homeland Security so the House and Senate can participate in a conference committee on that legislation. In the conference, Democrats and Republicans will have the opportunity to negotiate the details of the Homeland Security bill, which includes issues of border security, humanitarian aid, drug inspection technology, and many others. We expect the continuing resolution to clear the House and be signed by the President today. As soon as the President signs the legislation to open government, we in Congress will roll up our sleeves. I genuinely hope that this process can produce something that is good for the country and acceptable to both sides. We don't agree on some of the specifics of border security. Democrats are against the wall. But we agree on many things, such as the need for new technology and the need to strengthen security at our ports of entry. And that bodes well for coming to an eventual agreement. I believe there's good faith on both sides to reach an agreement, and we will work diligently to achieve one. And because we've set this up as a conference, Democrat and Republican leadership, House and Senate, will be involved, as will the appropriators from those committees. Most importantly, this agreement means that the government will reopen, and 800,000 federal employees will finally get paid. After over a month of increasing desperation, our dedicated public servants will get the relief and the paychecks they are entitled to, including back pay. From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank the federal workers who worked so selflessly this past month. They should never have to go through this again. We will do everything we can to make sure they won't have to. The past month has proven just how vital government services are to the American people, whether that's air traffic control, food safety inspections, the Coast Guard, national parks, and so many others. With this agreement, TSA, Border Patrol, FBI agents will all be paid again for protecting our country. Our airports will get back on track. We'll resume maintenance of our cherished national parks, and the IRS can issue tax refunds in a timely manner, all critical for the well-being of the American people. As Democrats have said all along, the solution to this impasse was to separate funding the government from our disagreements over border security. This agreement endorses that position. It reopens the government without preconditions and gives Democrats and Republicans an opportunity to discuss border security without holding hundreds of thousands of American workers hostage. Hopefully, it means a lesson has been learned. Shutting down government over a policy difference is self-defeating. It accomplishes nothing but pain and suffering for the country and the American people. That's a lesson we all must bear in mind when this next continuing resolution expires, and that will make its success more likely. We can never hold American workers hostage again. I yield the floor.
Madam President. We were listening in there on the Senate floor, Senator Schumer talking about this latest effort. The president has agreed to open up and end the shutdown. I want to bring in CBS News chief congressional correspondent Nancy Cortez, who joins us now by phone. Nancy, can you sort of walk us through what's going to happen now at this point to get the government up and running?
Sure. Well, the biggest piece of good news from leaders McConnell and Schumer is that this all can, in fact, be taken care of today. That was one big question that a lot of us had. Leader McConnell said that he sees no reason why the Senate, which is in session, can't vote on this today, send it over to the House, and the House, which is not in session, will pass it also this afternoon by something called voice vote, which basically means that all the members of the House don't have to come back here to Capitol Hill. They can essentially pass it unanimously, and then it goes to the president's desk, who will obviously have a huge incentive to sign it today as well, because, as you know, this is the day that, for the second time, federal workers are missing a paycheck. So the quicker they can get that back pay and that paycheck, the more whole they will be made. We've been asking various congressional leaders if they know how long it's going to take to get that back pay to this group of 800,000 or so federal workers, and they, frankly, aren't that clear on it themselves. They say it depends on how good of a job the administration did in preparing for the government to be reopened, how quickly the gears can grind back into motion again and get those checks out the door. So they said that it is the White House's Office of Personnel Management that really is going to hold the key to how quickly some of these workers can get paid.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear the president say he's going to reopen, get them paid really quickly right away. But it's interesting to see exactly how that happens. My next question to you is sort of about this bipartisan panel on border security, Nancy. I want to play for you what the president first had to say about a potential shutdown in 3 more weeks.
So let me be very clear. We really have no choice but to build a powerful wall or steel barrier. If we don't get a fair deal from Congress, the government will either shut down on February 15th again, or I will use the powers afforded to me under the laws and the Constitution of the United States to address this emergency.
The powers that he has to address this emergency. Nancy, I'm curious about the bipartisan panel. Who's made up of that? Do we know yet? And exactly what will this border security package look like?
Well, we got some indication just now from the Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer. He said it's going to be comprised of congressional leaders from the House and Senate, and also the appropriators, the members of Congress who sort of hold the purse strings, if you will, and control how much money goes to each individual agency. So this is a group that really knows the ins and outs of the Department of Homeland Security and its various needs. And so they'll basically all get together over a series of weeks to try and figure out if the House and Senate can come to some kind of agreement on a package, on a spending package that would significantly increase spending on a variety of border security measures, not just the wall that the president is so determined to get and which Democrats are so determined to deny him, but other measures as well. And there are a lot of areas of agreement among Democrats and Republicans about things that need to be done at the border to make it more secure, particularly at the ports of entry, particularly when it comes to other forms of technology. So there is a lot of common ground. And the question is, how quickly can they come up with this package? And do some of these more hot button issues kind of get rolled up into that debate? Because after all, Congress has been trying for years to pass some kind of comprehensive immigration package that deals with both border security and people who are already in this country illegally. And those deals have always fallen apart because there really is no agreement when it comes to things like, do you provide people with a pathway to citizenship? What do you do about young people who were brought to this country illegally as children? Do all of those hot button issues become a part of this debate, or is it going to be focused more narrowly on border security itself? And if Democrats hold the line and continue to refuse to put any border wall funding in that package that the conference committee negotiates, will the president accept it if it's billions of dollars, but not for his signature proposal, or will he walk away and declare a national emergency instead?
Elements we're not exactly sure about how this will unfold minute by minute. I want to thank you very much, Nancy Cortez, for joining us and giving us a breakdown on all of that.
You're welcome.
We are going to take a quick break. We've got much more news when we return.